My whole class cheated, and I think I'm the only one who got away with it. One time in college, one of my older professors accidentally stapled answer sheets to the back of every test. It was one of those early morning exams where everyone was half asleep, including the professor, it seemed. A few minutes after all the tests were handed out, the teacher took a phone call and stepped outside. At that point, everyone noticed the answer sheet, and we decided to keep quiet and just tear it off when we were done. All the questions were multiple choice except the last one, which said, "Answers will vary." Once I finished the test, I went to the podium to turn it in, but I was curious about what other people wrote for the last question. So, I discreetly took a look at some of them. I kid you not, all the tests I looked at literally said, "Answers will vary," as their actual answers. I stood there frozen for a second, not believing college kids could be so stupid. But then I started to second guess myself. Did the professor do this on purpose? Was this some kind of test within a test? I decided to play it safe. For the last question, I wrote a generic answer about how perspectives on the issue could differ depending on individual experiences and background. It was vague, but it felt safer than copying the prompt word for word. Anyways, I passed my test and was never called back. I didn't know anybody in that class, and this was my last test before I graduated, so I never found out if they got caught or not. I graduated, got my degree, and moved on with my life. Years later, I'm sitting at my desk at work when I get a message on LinkedIn from one of my old college classmates. Let's call him Mark. Mark and I were never really close, but we had shared a few classes together. The message read, "Hey, do you remember that economics class where we all cheated on the final? Something crazy happened. Call me." Curiosity got the better of me, so I gave him a call. Mark picked up almost immediately, sounding a bit breathless with excitement. "Man, you're not going to believe this," he started. "Remember how everyone copied answers will vary for the last question? Well, turns out, the professor did that on purpose." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "The professor stapled the answer sheets on purpose to see who would cheat and who wouldn't. It was all part of some study he was doing on ethics in academia. The answers will vary question was the real test. Everyone who wrote that got an automatic fail for the course." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "But I passed," I said, feeling a cold sweat forming. "I didn't write that." "Exactly," Mark exclaimed. "You were one of the few who didn't fall for it. The professor wrote a whole paper on it. He got some kind of award for it, too. Your name was mentioned in the acknowledgements as one of the students who didn't cheat." I felt a mix of relief and disbelief. "Wait, so everyone else failed?" "Yeah, man. It was a huge scandal. A lot of people had to retake the course. Some even faced disciplinary actions. I can't believe you didn't hear about it." I shook my head, still processing the information. "I guess I got lucky." Mark laughed. "More like you were smart. Anyways, I just thought you'd want to know. Crazy how things turn out, right?" We chatted for a bit longer before saying our goodbyes. As I hung up, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of vindication. I had always prided myself on my integrity, and in the end, it had paid off in ways I never could have anticipated. But the story didn't end there. A few weeks later, I received an email from the same professor who had given that infamous test. He wanted to meet up for coffee. Intrigued, I agreed. When we met, he explained that his study had gained significant attention, and he was now writing a book on the subject. He wanted to include my story and even offered to pay me for an interview. As we talked, he revealed more details about the experiment and how it had impacted his teaching methods. As I left the coffee shop, I felt a sense of closure. What had started as a bizarre twist of fate had turned into a defining moment in my academic journey. And while I never found out the fate of all my classmates, I learned an important lesson about integrity and the unpredictable ways it can shape our lives. But here's the kicker. A few months after the book was published, I received another message, this time from a journalist. They were doing a follow-up story on the professor's study and had uncovered something shocking. Turns out, the professor had initially failed to get approval from the ethics board for his experiment. The whole study was under review, and there was a possibility that the results, including my heroic non-cheating, could be invalidated. Suddenly, my sense of vindication was replaced with a new uncertainty. Had I really done the right thing, or was I just a pawn in a flawed experiment? The journalist wanted my perspective, and as I agreed to an interview, I realized that my college test was far from over. The real test was just beginning. A few months after the book was published, I received another message, this time from a journalist. They were doing a follow-up story on the professor's study and had uncovered something shocking. Turns out, the professor had initially failed to get approval from the ethics board for his experiment. The whole study was under review, and there was a possibility that the results, including my heroic non-cheating, could be invalidated. I was sitting at my kitchen table, sipping my morning coffee when I got the call. The journalist, a woman named Sarah, sounded both excited and apologetic. "I know this might come as a surprise, but we'd really love to get your perspective on this," she said. "Could we meet up sometime this week?" I agreed, feeling a mix of curiosity and apprehension. We settled on a local cafe, and a few days later, I found myself sitting across from Sarah, her tape recorder between us. "So, first of all, how did you feel when you heard about the study and your part in it?" she asked, leaning forward with interest. I shrugged, trying to play it cool. Honestly, I was shocked. I mean, who expects to find out years later that they were part of some ethical experiment? Sarah nodded, jotting down notes. "And how do you feel now, knowing that the study might have been conducted unethically?" I sighed, stirring my coffee absent-mindedly. "It's complicated. On one hand, I'm glad I didn't cheat, and it's nice to be recognized for that. But on the other hand, if the whole thing was flawed from the start, does it even matter? Sarah gave me a sympathetic smile. I can see why you'd feel that way. The ethics board is reviewing everything now, and there could be some serious consequences for the professor. We talked for a while longer, and as I walked back to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. What if the entire experience I had prided myself on was just a sham? It felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. A few weeks later, I got another call, this time from the ethics board. They wanted to interview me as part of their investigation. I agreed, and a week later, I found myself in a small, stuffy office, facing a stern-looking panel of reviewers. They asked me all sorts of questions about the test, the class, and my interactions with the professor. I did my best to answer honestly, but the whole experience was nerve-wracking. As the meeting wrapped up, one of the reviewers, a kind-looking older woman, gave me a reassuring smile. "Thank you for your time," she said. "We'll be in touch." I left the building feeling drained and uncertain. It was like being back in college, waiting for the results of a big exam. Except this time, the stakes felt even higher. A month later, I got a letter from the ethics board. With trembling hands, I tore it open and read the contents. The board had concluded that while the professor had indeed conducted the study without proper approval, the data collected was still valid. The professor would face disciplinary action, but the results of the study, including my non-cheating, would stand. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It wasn't a perfect outcome, but it was something. The professor's unethical methods had been exposed, but my small act of integrity remained recognized. Years passed, and the story faded into the background of my life. I got married, started a family, and moved on with my career. But every now and then, I'd get a message or an email from someone who had read the professor's book or heard about the study. They wanted to know more about the hero student who didn't cheat. One day, I got a particularly interesting message. It was from a filmmaker who wanted to turn the story into a documentary. I was hesitant at first, but after some convincing, I agreed. The filming process was surreal, and as I recounted my experience, I realized how much I had grown since that fateful test. The documentary premiered at a small film festival, and to my surprise, it received rave reviews. People were fascinated by the story of the accidental answer sheets, the ethical dilemmas, and the eventual exposure of the professor's methods. After the screening, a young woman approached me. "Hi, I just wanted to say your story really resonated with me," she said. "I'm a student, and I've faced similar pressures to cheat. Hearing how you handled it has inspired me to stay honest." Her words hit me harder than I expected. In that moment, I realized that my story, flawed as it was, had made a difference. It wasn't just about a test or a study, it was about integrity, and how our actions, even the small ones, can have ripple effects.